Torah does not say, but the Torah does describe that man was made in his form, and God gave him a soul. What exactly is the soul of man? May surprise you, the soul of man is his intellect. For the soul is the eternal awareness of the supreme wisdom, which is God. That's what a soul really is. A soul is an intellect. And God gave man the intellect that distinguishes man from the animal. And all of the human being was created at one time. I want to go back to the eye. This fascinates me. I've always marveled at the pictures of the complexity of the eye, the wondrousness of the way in which we focus, that our eyes, the pupil is made smaller or bigger depending upon the amount of light that there is, that the cornea is an almost perfect lens, that light enters into the chamber which is filled with all kinds of thick liquids, and through this thick liquid light penetrates straight and makes an image on the back of the eye, which is called the retina. The retina not only gets the image correct, but also the colors, the qualities, the subtle differences, and sees the picture that is before him or her that is coming through this eye. And I marveled at the complexity of the nerves and how the nerves have to send impulses to the brain, and how the brain has a deciphering area which is able to figure out what those impulses mean and what image there is in front of them based upon these impulses. This is an incredible activity and function. It is more complex than any camera, than any modern computer. And yet, people out there think that this happened by itself, that this was somehow or other evolved from tiny little creatures who began to become light sensitive. And in gradations, the light sensitive became an area that became almost like an eye. The eye became more and more cupped in until finally it developed into the type of eye that we see in the animal, we have and the animals have, and so on and so forth. I want to address that for a moment. I want to address one particular point. Professor Dawkins has this friend of his, who's also apparently an atheist, who claims that if God were an engineer, he'd be fired for malfeasance. Because, he says, there's a blind spot on the person's eye. Notwithstanding all the wondrousness of the complexity of the eye, the perfection of the lens, how does a perfect lens develop? Without glass, without a polisher, just by itself. Perfect lens. From mucus. Mucus creates a perfect lens. I suppose mucus creates an iris that becomes like a shutter, closing and opening. And yes, very good fortune to create our retina. But the retina has a fault, because it has a blind spot where the optic nerve enters into the brain. So let me address that for a moment. Why would God put a blind spot in a person's eye? So I'll give you two plausible answers. Number one, the reason why there is a blind spot is so that man should understand that no matter how much he or she sees and observes that we're always missing something. If you didn't have a blind spot, you could think that you knew everything. The other thing is, you have to recognize that in all your observation, in all your dealings with people, there is a blind spot for yourself. When it comes to yourself, you don't see your own faults and how you're doing things. You only see your needs. You don't see what you're doing to another person and how you're treating another person. I include myself in that. There was once a famous rabbi, Rabbi Shapsi Cohen, was once a merchant. That's how he earned his living. He was a merchant for several weeks in the year, sold his goods, and for the rest of the year was able to study Torah. And he once came into a Beth Din. He and his partner had gotten into an argument over the terms of their agreement and how they were supposed to divide up the profits. Rabbi Shapsi Cohen rebutted everything that his partner said. And he says, look, I have the evidence from all of the major books of the Torah. It is clear that I am right and my partner owes me. The rabbi, hearing the case, listened intently to the words of this very learned man, went back into his study, and was just about ready to agree with the man when he suddenly saw a volume of a new book. It was a new book on Jewish jurisprudence. And he looked up the relevant section, and in there the author quotes the Rambam, the Rif, all of the great classical commentators on the law, and says despite all of that, there is an error in understanding what they're talking about. And based upon this error, you might conclude this way, but the conclusion is not that way. The conclusion is completely different. And so now the rabbi had this new book that had shed light upon the opinions of the great classical authors. And he thought about it and thought about it and said the new author is right. He came back out and said to the partners that not the Shach, not Rabbi Shapsi Cohen was right, but the other one was right. And the rabbi said, the young rabbi said, why? I told you all my sources. Don't you agree that my sources are with me? And the rabbi said, yes. Superficially, you'd be correct. But I just received a new book on Jewish jurisprudence. The man's name, I don't know, but the book is called Siftei Kohen, the lips of the priest. And in it, he claims that that this is an incorrect reading of those great commentaries, and the law has to be different. And in fact, you are a classic example of somebody who falls prey into thinking that the law is this way when it's really different than you say. And so I'm siding with your partner. The young man accepted. He says to him, a person does not see his own faults. For you see, Rabbi, I am the author of the book that you were reading. And this verifies what the rabbis tell us, that Odem Korav Eitzel Atzmoi, a man is close to himself. He's not impartial. Ve'ein Odem Roye Choiv Le'atzmoi, a person doesn't see his own faults and his own lacks, or seeing that his ideas are faulty. I am the author, and I myself, when it came to me, did not see the truth of the verdict. And so the reason why you have a blind spot is to realize that there's a part in you that is blind to your own issues. And in fact, that's why atheists are not impartial. They think that they are moral, but really, their morality is relative to their own ideas. If their ideas change, the morality changes. And if you get close enough to a situation where you're involved, all of a sudden things break down, and you don't see your own faults.